On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Meg Pittman. She's the VP of People at DBT Labs. We're going to be talking about evolving the people team to be enablers. I think it starts at the top. You have to have authentic leadership. Your team has to be empowered. And as a leader, you have to actually be able to embody those traits and help your team kind of absorb those and kind of become those enablers we want them to be. We're going to talk about some of the stigmas around people and talent teams, about being gatekeepers, about being a little bit too focused on risk mitigation. And how do you move away from that and get to yes and help be that enabler that every people and talent leader wants to get to? Meg, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Amir. Happy to be here.
DBT Labs, tell us what you guys do over there.
Yeah, we are on a mission empowering data practitioners to create and disseminate organizational knowledge. So essentially, we take data that's in your warehouse, help anyone within your company transform that into helpful insights, and you can make the best decisions possible with that. We make it super easy.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm an ex data person, so I'm familiar with the product, and I think it's a great piece of
Yeah.
software. So
Oh,
let's
awesome.
yeah, when on a side note, whenever we get a customer that wants us to work on a data role, the DBT is somewhere in there. So we've gotten very
Amazing.
so it's out there and it's working great. In terms of this topic, I think we came upon this topic because we were talking about some of the potentially older concepts around people and talent teams. You mentioned something also about authentic leadership, and I think as we were kind of talking, we really got to a point in which an authentic leader has certain traits, but an authentic leader also has to empower their team if we want to see people and talent teams be more transformative, because that's what everybody wants. But the tactical part of it's the hard piece. When you are looking at yourself and you're thinking about authentic leadership and how you embody that, can you maybe just talk to us? What does authentic leadership mean to you, and how do you embody it?
Authentic leadership. I have to be this. And this isn't just an HR or people and culture thing. Like every leader in a company, I think, has a responsibility to this, to like do it, to name it, to choose to do it, and to allow others to kind of see that and then feel safe doing so. I think in the absence of this, especially in the absence of being in a position of leadership, how would you ever know it was like safe or okay to do so? Like we're taught from so early on to act a certain way, speak a certain way, what's acceptable, don't rock the boat. And honestly, it's pretty ridiculous. I was actually like reminded of the importance of this week. You and I started talking about this a few weeks ago. And I was just reminded of like the power of it. I joined DBT Labs about 6 months ago at this point, still definitely in learning mode. My team's now at this point, though, where we're really kind of looking at how we're structured, who's where, what we're doing, and thinking about how we should be organized to meet the business. And so there have been a lot of convos around like role clarity, what motivates you, what brings you happiness, what doesn't. And in one of these convos, I actually asked one of my direct reports, she has a team of three. I said, do you even like managing? And I observed a number of things over the last few weeks where like led me to believe that the answer might not be like a hard yes. And she took a second and she was like quiet and she looked down and then she just said no with like a very strong period at the end of that sentence. And I was like, great, like let's do something to fix this. And we identified another role she could step into and one where she becomes a peer to her team versus a manager and like really focus on what brings her joy. And she started to tell her team about this decision this week and she gave them the context, brought them along in that. And one of her sort of like, current but soon to be past direct reports was like, you're so brave in doing that. Like, I love that you were able to say that and be honest and like have the courage to do so. And she responded to this person, I couldn't have done it. Meg had not done it first. And like, this is not a story about me at all. It's about being authentic and courageous and candor in naming that. And because I've done it with her, she did it with her team. Her team is now seeing that and going to do it with their peers, with their stakeholders, with whatnot. And it's like it's this entire system we're building where you can say the thing, you can be candid, and you get out of it what you need. And there's no like repercussions or fear. And like that's not something we're taught. And so that's where this authentic leadership, I think, is so critical and so important. She would have sat in this role managing people probably not doing it super well or being successful for a long time and like might have left the company and like that's not a great outcome.
Hmm. That's actually a fantastic story, by the way. And you know, the one thing I'm listening to that I was hearing vulnerability, and I was thinking about safe spaces. We talk about safe spaces a lot for people to be comfortable. How and again, this within the context of the story, or just not. But I was curious. How do you help foster that safe space? Because obviously, I could see you're leading with vulnerability, and that's good. You're inviting others to come in. The other component is for the other party to actually step into that vulnerability, that safe space, and go, I feel comfortable. It's not just manager direct report relationship where, you know, they have power over my future. This is a thing that we all do. We don't talk about this part about managers and direct reports, but the manager controls a bit of your direct future. So there is a difficulty in stepping into that safe space. How did you foster that? Because I think that's an amazing story.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever heard Frances Spray speak. She's a professor at a Harvard Business School. And our CTO, Mark, actually recently sent me one of her TED Talks, and I'm like completely obsessed. But she talks about how being authentic is easy when you're around people who look like you or talk like you or whatever. And if you represent any sort of difference, it becomes that much harder and scary and fearful, and like you do have to like intentionally create that space. And I'm a woman on a completely male leadership team. I'm crazy ambitious. Being my gender, sometimes that has certain connotations. But I believe like I have so much to keep learning. And so like I'm like still going, and I'll keep going until I feel like I have nothing left to learn or I've tapped out. But there are some ways in like how I identify where I am like the majority here. And then there are some ways where like I am not like the majority. And so um, in the past, to kind of like come back to that in a second, some of the dumbest advice I've ever received went completely against being authentic. Like, go by Meg or go by Megan, not Meg. It sounds more professional. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, nobody cares what I go by. Or like, don't swear as much. You look stupid. And I'm like, did I not get my point across? Like, if I didn't get my point across, that's one thing. But the feedback is not don't swear. It's do a better job of getting your point across. But I knew early on in my career, like I was capable of like so much more than the opportunities I saw in front of me. And so I really started to like think for myself, and I started being more myself. And as I started being more authentic, my career legitimately started to take off. And I spent years in therapy, years of self reflection, and I can full heartedly say like authenticity was the catalyst in my career and what I feel like is where I'm thriving and where I'm like making an impact. It wasn't my graduate degree. It wasn't like a certain pedigree from a certain company. And I see this success as a privilege, and I carry a responsibility to kind of like own my space and own my voice, and to create a space where others can feel safe in doing the same. Because when they see and hear it, that's when they can sort of like replicate that in a way that makes sense to them, be wildly successful, whatever it is they want to do. But what I want folks to know from this is like, it's a choice. Like authentic leadership, radical candor, these are things that are becoming like total buzzwords out there. So how you do this really matters, and you have to make a choice to do it every single day. And so that kind of goes back to me, leading with my heart on my sleeve and being able to do it around people who have let me do that, even if I look different or sound different. And I think that's where this like vulnerability like really creates a space where there's low risk for others as well. And then rewarding them or kind of like supporting them in that. Like my direct who had said, no, I don't want to be a people manager. I could have, been like, great, let's figure out a transition from the company. I need a manager. But she brings a lot of value to what she does, and she cares deeply about the culture and the people here. And I'm like, let's try to find a space where you can be successful. It could have easily gone a different way. And then next time she might not speak up when she's not happy with, 50% of her responsibilities on a daily basis.
I love that, and I love the way you've thought about it, the way you're actually executing. Because I think it is one thing to hear the buzzy words, and the other is actually to embody those traits so that your team can see them, so your team can emulate them. I think in talent and people, we have some institutionalized notions of the role of being vulnerable by going by Megan, not Meg, because there is a component of we're here to support in a subservient way the business. We're here to be quote unquote at the beck and call of hiring managers. People might not like to hear that, but it is how I view this is the institutionalized side of this. And people say we want to transform, we want to have a seat at the table. I'm hearing you talk about becoming more authentic and then making a bigger impact, and by that same channel allowing your team to make that impact. Do you think instead of us focusing on trying to disrupt the role, we just need to actually look beyond the guardrails that have been defined for so long? Is that really is that the lowest hanging fruit for people and talent leaders?
I mean, I would agree with a lot of what you just said. I think HR, human resources, starts with human. Like, I think we've lost our way a little bit on like leading with the human. I lead with my stories, like I lead with my experiences, and then folks around me, in front of me, behind me, wherever, they can do the same. I recently spoke at, I think a good example of this is like I recently spoke at our company kickoff, and it was sort of like mid morning, right before lunch. Everyone was probably like, I want a break. I need to eat. And they'd listen to like our company goals and objectives for like 4.5 hours, like where sort of the data AI space is going, all very important stuff to like generate alignment, right? And then I got up there and I actually spoke about a tragedy that my family experienced 6 years ago, and the crazy journey it took us on since then. And 6 years and one day ago, I never in a million years would have predicted we'd be where we are today. And then, the days after the events, the month after the event, I was so dark. I was so down. Like there was no light at the end of the tunnel. And then, like, I'm very lucky that now today I can say we are in such a wonderful place and we have never been more blessed. And had that event not happened, I have no doubt like we would not be where we are today. And this is not like a drink the good wine motto thing. It's more like my point is that life work is not a straight line. And you don't have to have these like clear swim lanes where you show up one way between certain hours and another in other ways. Like you should be your authentic full self. And on certain days that looks your best. Other days you're like, I've got 80% in my tank. And that's okay. And you just need to keep leaning into the opportunity because I think in hindsight, this journey and the twists and turns and like the jungle gym we're climbing on, it starts to make sense and you can be like proud of that path. So yeah, I think we need to lead with the human. And I think you balance out that tension between the professional, the objectives, the work we're doing that has to happen so we're successful and like, able to stick around and do work that we love and get paid. But like you also have to like be able to bring yourself into that at every moment.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you went with a personal story and didn't talk about maybe something talent or people related. I'm sure there's plenty to have talked about, but you went some in a different direction, which is awesome. I guess talking about enabling your team, traditional, process heavy people talent teams, lots of hey, don't, we can't, we shouldn't, that's not right. There's a lot of those that come up because obviously people in this side of the house, they do have to follow process. And there are some legal implications. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not an easy line dotted line to follow, but you mentioned figuring out how to get to yes. And I think when I think about enabling your team, it's also about how do you actually enable them to be better problem solvers so they can find a good way, a healthy way around the no and still support the business. Maybe talk to us a little bit about how you work with your team and kind of that process of trying to not just be, hey, we can't, to, hey, let's figure it out.
I think there's like two elements of this. There's three actually. I think traditionally, like people, talent teams can be or sort of are perceived as gatekeepers and decision makers. I think oftentimes we can lead from a place of no. No, we can't do that. No, that's not a good idea. No, we have a policy, and it's clear, right or wrong, et cetera. And then from the risk mitigation standpoint, like I think we've we have to do what's right for our people, period. We always should. But leading from a place of risk mitigation, I think, loses sort of the impact that we can have as professionals. And so I think these three things, the gatekeepers, the no, and like leading from a risk or compliance perspective, are like completely my pet peeves. I think every single person in a company should be a highly skilled decision maker. And I think it is not HR's job to make decisions. It is our job to support you as an employee, any role, any level, in becoming incredibly effective problem solvers and therefore like excellent decision makers. If we're making decisions, we're operating within our functional bias, just like finance would be or legal would be as well. You, as the employee, have deeper business acumen, you're more invested. And while you need to be able to move quickly and operate with confidence, like our role is not to tell you exactly how that should look. Our role is to help understand what you're trying to achieve and then co-create kind of like the best path to getting there. So like what's the problem you're actually trying to solve? What's the root cause? What needs to happen? So it's never a no, it's a like, let's get in this boat together and start rowing in unison. And then I think within this partnership, you have to sort of support the needs of like balancing speed with simplicity. I think like moving away from like the risk mitigation standpoint. I mean, I think personally, every single one of us was tested around our own personal risk tolerances during the 4 years of the pandemic. And at different times, some of us were comfortable doing things that others weren't. And we were all impacted in very, very different ways. And for so long, like each of us was like having to weigh the risks about every step that we took, the impact that had on us, on our loved ones, on those who lived in a building with us. And we lived our lives that way. And it's like, frankly, a shitty way to live. Why would we operate our business that way? Like, let's plan for everything that can go wrong. And how much goes wrong? Like, things go wrong every single day. So, when you take this like risk mitigation approach, like as HR folks, we start to adopt some of those behaviors I named like previously of like being gatekeepers, making decisions, saying no, only making like baby step process improvements. And it takes up like so much time that most of these functions like never actually enable the business proactively. And like the other day, you and I were talking about a shift in like the security space as they moved to like, with the offense. And I love a sports analogy, like ask anyone at my company. And that like stuck with me. Like we need to play offense. We need to play to win. And we need to play like we're building a dynasty here. And in my opinion, you cannot do that when you're building a culture and business to fend off risk. And I think just like it wouldn't be a podcast in 2024 if we didn't mention like AI, right? But like AI is like changing so much in the world and in HR. And like what AI lacks is human ingenuity. And that's what differentiates us as like a function and as like workers and like can't be replicated in AI. And we bring so much to that. So like if we're not coming from a place of ingenuity, of partnership, of like aligning on goals and getting there, we're going to be obsolete very soon. Just like, I know that's like a bold statement, but like I firmly believe it. So like we as HR partners have to be creative. We have to take risks. We have to understand that sometimes this means we will get it wrong. And we need to be okay with that risk. It's not a matter of, if, it's a matter of when. And then how do we make sure not to kind of perpetuate that risk beyond it? So yeah, we can't be gatekeepers. We can't come from a place of let's mitigate risk here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to follow up and ask you, moving away from being a gatekeeper, we talked about some of the process heavy, getting away from no. Is the barrier, and again, you hear a lot about transforming HR, transforming the people, transforming talent. Is there a component in that where there just needs to be a little bit more risk taken by the people and talent teams and pushing themselves out of their comfort zones? Because some of this change is business aligned, some of it is business driven. And if you are in a company where processes are established, you're managing processes. We're comfortable, right? I mean, you get comfortable managing process. I mean, I love routine. Who doesn't love routine? I love my bedtime routine. If you change it, I might not sleep well that night. My wife knows that, and she stays away for that routine. But is there truth to that? Because I don't want to be unfair and categorize that, but I listen to you and I see the industry and I go, there's a disconnect between people that are pushing themselves into areas and taking some of that risk and saying the process might just not be, it might be okay to break it. Maybe it's okay for us to look past what we've done and re-envision and go, all right, let's revitalize the process.
Yeah, we do need to adopt more risk. And I think like sometimes, the easy definition of risk is like, oh, we're going to get sued or, oh, we're going to get fined or something like that. And that's not all of the risk there is. Like, I think fundamentally, like, we have to operate within the golden rule of like treat people as like you would want to be treated. And so like we have a responsibility to the business, but also to every team member at a company to like do right by them. And so I'm trying to shift more into the like do right by them and walk away from this worry of like, are we going to get sued or are we going to get fined? Like, if we're operating in sort of this like golden rule mentality, the answer is probably no. And if we do it, and if we do get fined or whatnot, or we are at risk of compliance, like it's easy to fix because our intentions were right. So if you're kind of like thinking about it from that lens, like, I'll give you an example. Like at DBT Labs, our performance management system was actively currently flawed. Doesn't add the ROI that like it was designed to. And a lot of companies do performance reviews because that's what everyone does. And they look like one of three flavors of vanilla, like they're all the same, with varying degrees of, slight tints. So rather than make like small adjustments cycle over cycle and like repeatedly hearing that same feedback and coming from a place of like, we have to do this because we have to do this. Our talent management team actually like holistically looked at the program and said, let's burn it down. Here's the ideal state. And then I said, how fast can we get there? And in what steps do we need to take to get there? And so we're considering this fiscal year like a transition year for us where we're not stopping it or not doing it, but we're doing it in a very different way that then by the start of next year for us, it's going to look very, very different. And, like some of this like isn't novel and it isn't necessarily noble, but like what we were doing was becoming a check the box exercise. Like, HR folks, there's always a long list of stuff that needs to be done, but like, does it all add meaning or value to like the work experiences of every single person at a company? No, like period. And so like as we think about like what's important to us, building a high performance culture, take some risk, let it look different. Don't be afraid to like have a transition year or years if that's what it takes to get you. We need to really think about like, how are we building potential into the human system that we're creating here? And does it actually align with our values and what we're trying to achieve? So the answer to your question is yes, we need to take more risks. And I think part of that risk taking is getting creative and trying new things.
I love it, Meg. I think I love everything you said. I love the mindset. Hopefully, others have taken away what we were hoping to convey in terms of trying to help your team be enablers, which obviously starts with the leader. So, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing. If somebody wants to reach out to you, you've covered a lot of different things within this context. What is a good way of touching base with you in case somebody does want to ask you a follow up question?
Yeah, thanks, Amir. You can reach me on LinkedIn. You can reach me through DBT Labs website. Don't hesitate.
Okay, perfect. All right, we'll make sure we include those in the show notes. Again, thanks for being on. That's it for the episode. We'll be back again, different guests, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I love the concept of teams and organizations being enablers. And obviously, I'm within people and talent, so I'm a big fan of having that focus of being an enablement to business be at the forefront. I think that's really what when we talk about all this HR and people transformation and disruption, got to take a risk. Has to start with the calculated risk. And I think Meg did a great job of talking about authentic leadership, talking about how to set your team up to take those risks and be successful. So share this with somebody else who might find this episode helpful. Please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.